back, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday we cut the basic shape of our bow out of a piece of ipe. We learned that ipe is a really hard tropical wood that grows in South America. We're using this for the bulk of our bow because it's so hard and strong. Today, the plan is to create the grip of the bow. So if you look at the bow from the side, you can see this isn't much to hold on to. So we need to add a little thickness around where you're going to hold on to it. The name that people use for the grip of a bow is the riser. So we are going to laminate some pieces of wood together to create the riser. The riser is going to be about 12 inches long, and it's going to be the same width as this piece of wood, which is 1 3/8. So today, we're going to take 3 or 4 different species of wood, and we will cut them out and then glue them together. Before we do this though, I want to talk a little bit about the different types of wood that are available for us to use. Let's take a look. So because we're going to be using different species of wood for the riser of the bow, and because we're using woods we don't normally use in the wood shop on this bow, this is a great opportunity for us to talk about different types of wood. So the first thing you need to understand is that all wood or lumber can be divided into 2 basic categories: softwoods, like I have over here, and hardwoods. Now, just because we call a wood a hardwood doesn't necessarily mean that it's harder than a softwood, but generally speaking, hardwoods are harder than softwoods. So let's actually start with the softwoods, since these are the wood we normally use in construction and we often use in the wood shop. So I've got a few over here. Let's take a look. So let's actually start out with pine. This is a piece of pine. Most of the wood that we use in the shop is pine. So if you've worked in the wood shop at all in here, chances are you've worked with pine. This should look really familiar to you guys. This is a piece of 1x pine. It's 3/4 of an inch thick, but it's got the knots in it. It's kind of a lighter color. It has the grain that you're familiar with. Pine is a great wood to work with because it's soft, so it cuts really easily. It's strong, and it tends to be a little bit less expensive than the other woods. Those are kind of the reasons that we use it in our wood shop. A nice thing about pine too, at least here in California, is it's readily available and it's a fairly sustainable resource. Pine trees grow fast, and it doesn't take a lot of carbon to get them to where we are. So this is pine. This is the wood you guys are familiar with. Pine is a softwood. Now, here's 3 other types of softwood that we occasionally use in our shop. This is Doug fir. So if you go to a lumber yard, most of the wood that you're going to see stacked up for building and construction is going to be, where we live, it's going to be Doug fir. Doug fir is also a fairly sustainable resource. Fir trees grow fast. These are the same trees that you see in Christmas tree farms. Oftentimes Christmas trees are Doug firs. But fir trees grow fast. They're strong, still relatively soft, easy to cut. It's a fairly sustainable resource. We don't use fir much in our shop. Fir tends to be more of a rougher grade wood that's used, like I said, in building houses. Here's a piece of fir. Fir is a little bit heavier. It's a little bit denser and tougher than pine, but again, it's used mainly for construction. Now here's 2 other interesting types of wood. This here is redwood. Now redwood comes in different colors and shades. Redwood is nice because it's rot resistant, meaning it's used oftentimes outdoors. It's a great wood. Redwood tends to be softer than pine. You have to be careful with redwood. We want to make sure that we are not using old growth redwood. We don't want to use redwood trees that have been growing for hundreds or thousands of years. And generally speaking, you can't harvest those now anyway. But this is redwood. We occasionally use redwood, not very much though. And this is cedar, western red cedar. I love cedar. It's like redwood. It's rot resistant. It tends to be very, very light, so it's lighter and softer than pine, and it's also very strong. Cedar makes an excellent wood for building boats out of. So it's great for building canoes and kayaks. We use it in our wood shop to make the hollow wood surfboards. This is one of my favorite woods. Cedar's great. These are all softwoods. So for the project we're building here with a bow, we don't want to use a softwood. We want a wood that's very hard and strong. And these woods are kind of out for that, even though these are the woods we normally use in the shop. Instead, we are going to use hardwood. Now here I have a bunch of examples of the hardwood, and I'm not going to talk too long about them, but you can see, and there are many out there, there's many different types, colors, shades, strengths. This is mahogany, which you've probably heard of before. Here we have maple, which you guys are familiar with now because we've used maple a couple times in our shop. Here we have, you know what? I'm not even sure what this is. I'm going to have to look more closely at what that is. This is ash right here. Ash is a nice strong wood. They often make baseball bats out of ash. This is a beautiful wood. This is one of my favorites. This is called sycamore. Sycamore grows around here. We often get pieces of sycamore that have been cut from local trees. I love the look of sycamore. It's got that cool kind of shimmery look to it. And grain, beautiful wood. Here we have another piece of maple. You'll notice the difference in color actually in this one and this one. But maple tends to be a lighter hardwood. This is a piece of elm, and I think we might do a project with elm later. This was harvested from a tree actually in my parents' backyard in Utah. This darker wood is black walnut. Beautiful wood as well. Here we have a piece of cherry. And then we have padauk, which has a really interesting color to it. And we're actually going to be using this in the bow, I think. And then this is interesting stuff here too. This is called zebra wood, and you can see why. So these woods are all much, much harder than the wood that we used, or I showed you a minute ago. Some of this wood is somewhat locally grown. A lot of it's grown in places like South America or Africa. We don't normally use it in the shop because it takes a lot of carbon to get it here to us. It also tends to be more expensive, and oftentimes it's more difficult to work with. So for the riser of our bow, we basically have these woods to choose from and a few others. So we're going to go through now, we're going to look at our bow, and we're just going to pick out colors that we think would look nice. So for this project, the sky's kind of the limit in terms of the wood that we use and choose. We're cutting out such a small piece that I don't mind using the more exotic woods that we have here. And this is mainly going to be decorative, though we want it to be hard and strong. So we don't have to worry too much about what species we're using as long as we're using hardwood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the piece of ipe here, and I'm going to kind of put it next to the wood, and I'm going to decide what I think looks best with the ipe. And I'm kind of inclined to use a little of the padauk and also the zebra wood here too, just because it's so different looking. But we might also want to throw something else in. The maple adds some really nice contrast because it's such a light wood. So I'm leaning towards the maple. I love sycamore. Any chance I can get to use sycamore, I'll use it. Possibly we'll use some sycamore. The black walnut's nice because it's so dark, but I'm not really into the contrast between the ipe and the black walnut here, so I'm going to stay away from that. I'm not so into the mahogany either in this case. The ash looks a lot like oak. That has an interesting look to it, so maybe we'll use some ash. And I'm going to stay away from the elm, I think, as well. We'll use elm for something else later, I think, in here. So I'm leaning at this point towards the padauk, the zebra wood, and the maple. You guys, I got a little carried away. That little lecture on wood took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take, so my apologies for doing that. I'll tell you what, let's call it a day for today. When we come back tomorrow, we'll continue working on the riser, we'll glue it all up, and then we'll move on to the next thing. See you guys then. Have a good night.